Poor twin girls kicked out of rich girl's party, but billionaire dad's response shocks everyone. Before watching the video, please leave a like and subscribe to support the channel. The final bell of the day rang out like a chorus of freedom, echoing through the ornate hallways of Willowdale Preparatory Academy. 23 excited 5-year-olds leapt from their seats, their polished shoes clicking on marble floors as they sprinted toward the classroom door. Laughter and chatter filled the air, bouncing off the high ceilings and gilded trim. Outside, in the school's perfectly manicured courtyard, a sea of luxury cars waited, engines humming, chauffeurs holding open doors for their young charges. Parents in tailored suits and cashmere coats waved with manicured hands, their smiles confident, their lives seemingly effortless. But inside the classroom, 2 little girls remained seated, their small backs straight and heads bent over a shared pencil case. Each pulled out a bundle of well-worn colored pencils, arranged in neat little rows inside handmade fabric pouches that were once part of their mother's old apron. Lily and Lucy Bennett moved with a quiet grace that came not from discipline, but from knowing that the world around them wasn't built for them. Identical in appearance, with long chestnut curls that framed their round, observant faces, they were often mistaken for one another, even by their teachers. But their mother, Maria, could always tell them apart. Lily was the one who whispered her dreams in the dark, and Lucy was the one who held her sister's hand tightly when they walked into unfamiliar places. "Ready to go, girls?" asked Miss Trainer, their kind-hearted teacher, her voice soft as she approached. She had a special affection for the Bennett twins, 2 little souls who never caused trouble, who always turned in their work on time, and who knew, far too early, how to take care of each other. "Yes, Miss Trainer," they replied in unison, slipping their notebooks into second-hand backpacks and standing with the kind of quiet dignity that rarely drew attention, but should have. The girls walked slowly through the gleaming corridors, their simple white school blouses tucked into handmade skirts stitched with care by their mother, the hems a little uneven, the fabric faded in the sun. They didn't wear the official school jackets that marked the elite status of Willowdale students. The navy blue blazers with gold-embroidered crests were simply too expensive. So they passed through the hallway like shadows, mostly invisible to their peers who clustered in laughing groups, already discussing the weekend plans filled with ballet recitals, tennis matches, and yacht parties. Outside, Maria Bennett stood waiting beneath the shade of an old oak tree, her arms wrapped tightly around a large canvas bag filled with sewing scraps and unfinished alterations. Her coat was faded denim, the same one she wore every day, and her hands bore the marks of long hours at the sewing machine. Small cuts from pins, calluses from scissors, tiny burns from the iron. She stood out from the rest of the parents like a single thread on a tapestry, humble, out of place, but stronger than anyone gave her credit for. When Lily and Lucy spotted her, their faces lit up with joy, the kind of joy that money could never buy. "Mommy," they called, running into her arms. Maria knelt down and pulled them close, her heart swelling at the warmth of their embrace. No matter how hard her days were, those little arms around her neck made everything worthwhile. "How was your day, my loves?" she asked, brushing a loose curl from Lucy's cheek. "Normal," Lily replied, with a small shrug that carried more weight than it should have for someone her age. "Nobody talked to us, but I finished my story about the dragon." "I helped her draw it," Lucy added quickly, her voice hopeful, seeking validation. Maria smiled, kissing them both on their foreheads. "I can't wait to read it." As they walked the familiar 20-minute path home, past rows of manicured hedges, over sidewalks swept clean by unseen hands, and finally across the busy avenue that divided wealth from modest living, the girls chattered about their favorite books and the snack Maria might make when they arrived. Unlike the other mothers, Maria didn't drive a Mercedes or a Lexus. She didn't own a single designer item. What she had were strong hands, sharp eyes, and an endless well of determination. Their apartment sat on the 3rd floor of a creaky old building with no elevator. The climb was tiring, but the girls never complained. Inside, their small world was bright and clean. The living room doubled as Maria's sewing studio. Bolts of discounted fabric lined one wall, and an old sewing machine from her grandmother stood proudly on a wide wooden table by the window. The place smelled faintly of lavender and starch. Light streamed through sheer curtains, illuminating half-finished dresses and patterned paper covered in Maria's looping handwriting. As soon as the girls sat at the kitchen table, pulling out their homework with practiced routine, Maria bustled about making hot chocolate, just like she did every Friday, a quiet celebration of making it through another week. The mugs were mismatched, but spotless. The cocoa was made with love, not powder from a can. Lily held up her math worksheet proudly. Miss Trainer gave me a gold star, and my drawing was picked for the hallway display, Lucy chimed in. Mariah clapped her hands softly, her eyes misting over. You two are the smartest, kindest, most creative little girls in the world. They beamed at her, their joy untainted by the judgment they received daily at school. In that moment, within the cracked walls of a modest apartment filled with thread and hope, they were just two little girls, loved deeply and proud of their small victories. But Maria she always knew that the world outside their door was not so kind. That in the marbled halls of Willowdale Prep, her daughters would always be seen as different, less than, outsiders in a world that had built its gates high and its walls higher. Still, she fought every day to give them a chance. Because despite the whispers behind her back, despite the pitying glances and exclusion, Maria Bennett believed in something bigger. She believed that education could open doors, even ones that seemed permanently shut. She believed that kindness could grow if watered enough. And most of all, she believed that her girls, her Lily and Lucy, deserved everything the world told them they couldn't have. They didn't know it, Olsen, but everything was about to change. Not because the world suddenly grew kind, but because someone unexpected was about to truly see them. And once seen, they would never be invisible again. It was late Friday afternoon, and the kitchen smelled of cocoa and worn pencil shavings as the Bennett twins, Lily and Lucy, sat at their tiny table scribbling away at their homework. Their little fingers clutched stubby pencils with practiced care, their brows furrowed in innocent concentration. Maria, their mother, stood at the stove, her back aching, her mind juggling 1,000 things. The dress alterations due Monday, the late rent notice folded in her purse, the last bit of cocoa powder she was stretching across 3 mugs. But as she turned to pour the warm drink into their mismatched cups, her eyes lingered on them. Her daughters, her miracles. Dressed in faded school blouses with tiny holes near the seams and hair tied with hand-sewn ribbons, they were the living proof of quiet resilience. Hot chocolate's ready, she said gently, sliding their mugs across the table. Both girls lit up instantly. It wasn't just the treat. It was the warmth, the routine, the knowing that no matter how difficult the week had been, this was their moment of peace. A celebration of simply getting through another 5 days of being different, of sitting alone at recess, of not being invited to play dates or birthday parties. They never complained. But Maria noticed the way they hesitated by the playground gates, the way they clung to each other when parents picked up their friends in luxury cars, while they trudged home hand in hand. As she leaned against the counter, sipping from her own chipped mug, her eyes caught something odd, an envelope sticking out of Lucy's backpack. Sweetheart, what's that? She asked, curious. Lucy looked puzzled at first, then reached inside and pulled out a glittering pearl-colored envelope. Oh, Miss Trainer gave this to us today, she said, handing it over with innocent curiosity. Lily, seated beside her, rummaged through her bag and produced an identical envelope. Maria's brow furrowed as she took one. It was unusually elegant. Thick cardstock, gold leaf writing, tiny embedded crystals. She opened it cautiously, half expecting to find a promotional flyer or a donation request. But instead, in graceful calligraphy, the words read, You are cordially invited to the birthday celebration of Megan Edwards. Theme, Royal Fairy Tale Ball. Dress accordingly. Saturday, 2 p.m. Location, Edwards Manor. Maria blinked. Megan Edwards? The Megan? The most popular girl in class, the one with diamond-studded hair clips and a nanny for each day of the week. The same Megan whose mother once whispered loudly during a school event, Some of these scholarship families don't really fit in, do they? That Megan. We were really invited? Maria asked aloud, trying not to let the disbelief slip too far into her voice. Lily nodded, her eyes wide. Everyone in class got one. Do you think we can go? Maria looked at her daughters. She had seen that look before, once, when they spotted a little girl in a storefront window wearing a sparkling ball gown. Another time when a ballet flyer came home and they knew the price of shoes alone made it impossible. That look, hope, as fragile as sugar glass and just as easily shattered. She didn't answer immediately. Her eyes scanned the invitation again. The words, dress accordingly, seemed to glare at her like a challenge. A fairy tale ball, a real princess party. She looked back at the girls. Both were leaning in now, their hands folded tightly, eyes shimmering with unspoken longing. I, Maria hesitated. The dresses, the time, the money. They couldn't afford store-bought costumes, not when groceries were already being rationed. But how could she deny them this? How could she tell her girls they couldn't go because they weren't born into a house with marble floors and three-car garages? How could she steal that hope from their eyes when life had already taken so much? "I'll make you the most beautiful dresses you've ever seen," she said, her voice trembling. The twins gasped, faces lighting up with joy so pure it pierced straight through Maria's soul. Lily squealed, "I want to be Belle!" And Lucy cried, "I want to be Cinderella!" They giggled, hugged each other, and then ran to Maria, throwing their arms around her waist. Maria bent down and held them tightly, feeling their small hearts beat against her chest. "I promise," she whispered, "you'll both look like princesses." That night, after the girls had gone to bed, still chattering through the walls about which princess dances they would try, Maria pulled out her old sewing box. She laid out scraps she had tucked away for years, satin remnants from a wedding dress alteration, gold trim left from a quinceañera gown, pale blue tulle too delicate to use on her usual projects. These pieces, precious leftovers she had never been able to part with, would now become dreams stitched into reality. Under the dim light of her kitchen table, Maria began to work. She sketched and cut, pinned and ironed. Her fingers moved with desperation and determination, guided by love and aching hope. Every stitch was a prayer that her daughters would, for once, not be excluded, that they might feel seen, that they might be allowed, even for a few hours, to just be children. The next morning, Maria continued sewing between meals and cleaning, the machine whirring beside pots of boiling pasta and stacks of laundry. The girls peeked in now and then, giggling at the glimpses of fabric. "Is that mine?" Lucy would ask. "You'll see soon," Maria would reply, smiling even as her fingers throbbed. Days passed, and with each one, the girls noticed a change at school. Children who had once ignored them now glanced their way. "Are you coming to Megan's party?" a boy asked casually during lunch. Lily nodded shyly, feeling something like pride swell in her chest. "Our mom is making our dresses," she said. "Oh," the boy replied, eyebrows raised. "Well, my mom's flying mine in from Paris." That pride flickered, just for a moment. On Friday night, after the girls had drifted into dreams of palaces and ballrooms, Maria put the finishing touches on the dresses. They weren't extravagant. They weren't made of silk from Paris or stitched by couture designers. But they were beautiful. Lily's dress was a soft golden yellow with tiny roses made from hand-rolled fabric scraps, while Lucy's gown shimmered in pale blue with tiny silver stars Maria had sewn one by one along the hem. In the morning, she called them in. "Come see." The twins ran into the living room, and when they saw the dresses displayed on child-sized mannequins, their mouths fell open in wonder. They approached cautiously as if afraid the dresses might vanish if they touched them. Are these really for us?" Lucy whispered. "Yes, sweetheart. Try them on." They changed quickly, barely able to contain their excitement. Maria buttoned each dress carefully, then stood back and guided them to the full-length mirror. The reflection that stared back was nothing short of magic. Two tiny princesses, radiant and real. Lily twirled, her skirt flaring around her like sunlight. Lucy stared wide-eyed at her reflection, then threw her arms around her mother. "You made us look like we belong." Maria felt tears prick her eyes. "You do belong," she said, her voice catching. "Don't ever let anyone tell you different." They packed the gift, an illustrated book of classic fairy tales Maria had managed to buy from a discount bin and wrapped carefully with leftover ribbon. It wasn't the flashiest present, but it was chosen with love. When they boarded the bus because taxis were too expensive, people stared. Not with scorn, but with soft smiles. An elderly woman whispered, "How beautiful," and gave them a piece of candy. The girls giggled, holding Maria's hands tighter, their faces glowing with anticipation. The bus climbed the long road to Edwards Manor, where black cars lined the winding driveway and costumed children ran across the sprawling lawn. The house itself loomed ahead like a palace from a picture book, gleaming windows, stone pillars, and banners fluttering in the wind. At the gate, a man in a suit checked the invitation. "Ah, the Bennett twins," he said, voice neutral. "Go on ahead. Children to the east wing." Maria hesitated. "Can I come in?" "Only invited parents are permitted in the adult area," he replied flatly. Maria knelt beside her girls. "I'll be back at 6 to pick you up. Have fun, be kind, and remember, no one here is better than you." The girls hugged her tightly, then walked forward, hand in hand, into the manor. Maria watched them go with a heart full of love and worry. She had done her part. Now the world had to meet them where they stood. What she didn't know, what none of them knew, was how quickly that glimmer of hope would be tested. That behind the dazzling chandeliers and sugary laughter, a storm was brewing. One that would shatter illusions, break hearts, and expose cruel truths no child should ever have to face. But for now, as Lily and Lucy stepped into the ballroom, decorated like a fairy tale kingdom, their eyes wide with wonder, they still believed. Believed they were wanted, believed they were included, believed they had finally found a door that would not close in their faces. That belief would soon be met with a painful reckoning, but it would also set in motion a series of events that would forever change not only their lives, but the lives of everyone in that golden mansion. So stay with me, because what comes next is not easy, but it is necessary. It is heartbreaking, but it is beautiful. It is cruel, but it leads to redemption. And if you hold on, if you listen closely, you'll see that sometimes the most magical transformations don't happen in castles. They happen in kitchens, in the hearts of mothers, in the courage of little girls, and yes, even in the remorse of a billionaire. The real fairy tale is just beginning. The morning of the party arrived like a promise. Lily and Lucy Bennett awoke to golden sunlight spilling through the sheer curtains of their tiny shared bedroom. For once, they did not dread the day. No sideways glances, no hushed whispers, no playground rejections. Today was going to be different. Today, they were invited. Today, they were princesses. Maria, their mother, had been up for hours. She hadn't slept much anyway. Her mind had been spinning all night, fretting over whether the stitches would hold, whether the glue on the handmade accessories had dried properly, whether the other children would be cruel. But when her girls tiptoed into the kitchen in their pajamas, rubbing sleep from their eyes, her smile was bright and brave. "Good morning, my little royals," she greeted, holding out 2 steaming mugs of hot cocoa. Lillian and Lucy beamed, clutching the mugs with both hands. Maria helped them dress with care. For Lucy, the Cinderella gown shimmered softly in the morning light, its silver stars twinkling like snowflakes. For Lily, her golden bell-inspired dress glowed against her warm brown curls, the tiny fabric roses painstakingly sewn along the hemline blooming like hope. Their hair was styled with delicate ribbons, and Maria added a hint of pink gloss to their lips, just enough to make them feel special. They looked radiant. They looked magical. And Maria whispered a silent prayer that today would not break their hearts. She packed the gift, the fairy tale storybooks that she'd saved up for, wrapped neatly with a handmade ribbon, and they set off. They couldn't afford a taxi, so the bus was their chariot. Fellow passengers smiled at the twins, complimenting their gowns. An old woman even said, "You girls look like real princesses," and the twins' faces lit up like sunrise. But as the bus pulled into the upscale neighborhood where Edward's Manor stood like a palace on a hill, Maria's anxiety returned with force. The estate loomed large, its iron gates wide open, welcoming guests arriving in sleek cars and chauffeur-driven sedans. Children dressed in professionally tailored costumes stepped onto plush red carpets. Parents in expensive coats sipped champagne in the garden. Everything gleamed. Everything whispered, "You don't belong here." Maria adjusted the twins' hair one last time at the gate and kissed their foreheads. "Be kind, be brave. I'll be back at 6. The man at the entrance took their names with a barely hidden smirk. "The Bennett twins," he muttered, as if the words tasted strange in his mouth. "Children only. Your mother can wait outside." Maria bent to meet their eyes. "Remember, you're just as special as anyone else in there," she said softly. "Don't forget it." With a final hug, Lily and Lucy walked hand in hand into the vast, glittering manor. Inside, the ballroom was a dream, an actual fairy tale castle brought to life. There were chandeliers shaped like stars, a fountain that poured chocolate, life-size cardboard carriages and thrones, tables lined with glittering candies and gilded party favors. Music played softly from an orchestra in the corner. Children danced, laughed, posed for photos in princess gowns more elaborate than anything Maria could have dreamed of making. But Lily and Lucy held their heads high, shoulders straight, clutching their gift between them as they moved through the sea of tulle and tiaras. And then, everything changed. They spotted Megan Edwards, the birthday girl, standing on a platform beneath a giant arch of roses. She wore a sparkling pink aurora gown, complete with a tiny tiara that shimmered under the lights. She was surrounded by a circle of girls, all dressed like Disney royalty, all giggling as they sipped punch from crystal flutes. Lily and Lucy approached timidly, still hopeful. "Happy birthday, Megan," Lily said, holding out the gift. Megan glanced at them, eyes sweeping over their dresses. "Oh, you actually came?" Her voice wasn't cruel, it was worse. It was amused. Lucy stepped forward. "We brought you a present," she said, her voice just above a whisper. Megan didn't take it. Behind her, Abby, her best friend, leaned in and said loudly, "Is that wrapping paper homemade too?" The girls around them burst into giggles. Another chimed in, "Those dresses look like my grandma's curtains." Lily and Lucy's cheeks flushed. Their hands trembled. "They're so old-looking," one girl muttered, wrinkling her nose. "Like, did your mom make those?" "She's a seamstress," Lucy whispered, blinking fast. "She worked really hard." "A seamstress?" Megan repeated, loud enough to draw attention from nearby guests. "That explains it. My mom said I had to invite the whole class. I didn't think anyone like you would actually come." Abby laughed. "They're on scholarship, remember? That means their mom doesn't even pay for them to go to our school." Another girl looked Lily up and down. "Their shoes are worn out." "My dress is from Paris," another girl bragged. "Where's yours from, the dollar store?" Lily tried to hold her ground, gripping the book like a shield. "We just wanted to come to your party." "You shouldn't have," Megan replied flatly. By now, children had formed a half circle around the twins, whispering, pointing. Even a few of the parents glanced their way, doing nothing to stop the growing cruelty. Then Megan snatched the gift from Lily's hands, tore off the wrapping, and held up the book. "A book?" she scoffed. "This is so boring." Before the girls could protest, she tossed it on the floor. One of the boys stepped on it deliberately, creasing the pages. The room erupted in laughter. "Trash princesses," someone whispered. Lucy's lower lip trembled. Lily bent to pick up the book, but a girl's foot beat her to it, smearing chocolate from her shoe onto the cover. Suddenly, Megan raised her voice. "You need to leave. This party is for friends." "But we were invited," Lucy whispered. "By mistake," Megan said coldly. "I don't want poor kids at my party." It was then that a staff member finally intervened. A woman in a party coordinator's uniform approached, frowning slightly. "Is there a problem?" "They weren't really invited," Megan said, folding her arms. "I want them out." The woman looked from Megan to the twins. The crowd was still watching, murmuring. Some children giggled. Others looked awkward, unsure. "Come with me, girls," the woman said gently. "No," Lily said, tears streaming now. "We didn't do anything wrong." The woman sighed. "I'll call your mother." Outside, Maria was sitting on the bus bench nearby, reading through sewing instructions she'd brought with her. Her phone buzzed. When she answered, her heart sank. "There's been a problem," the woman said. "The girls are very upset. We think it's best if you come." Maria didn't even hang up before she ran. By the time she arrived, security had been called. Lily and Lucy were sitting on a bench near the entrance, cheeks wet, dresses wrinkled, holding each other like lifelines. Maria dropped to her knees. "What happened?" "They laughed at us," Lucy sobbed. "They said we didn't belong." Maria hugged them both, her rage a storm held barely in check. She looked up at the security guard standing nearby. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I didn't agree with it, ma'am." "I just wanted them to feel included," Maria whispered, her throat tight. "To feel like they mattered." Back at home, the girls sat in silence as Maria made them hot chocolate again. But this time there was no joy, no comfort, only a heaviness in the air. Lucy finally whispered, "I never want to be a princess again." "Me neither," Lily added. Maria blinked hard, her heart breaking. They had been so excited. She had given all she had, and the world still told them, in no uncertain terms, "You are not enough." Later that night, when they were tucked in bed, Maria stayed up staring at the dresses she'd sewn, now folded carefully on the back of the couch. They had been made with love, and yet they had become the very thing that exposed her daughters to cruelty. She walked to the window and stared out at the lights of the city, wondering if anything would ever truly change. But she didn't know that something had shifted behind the scenes, that someone else had seen what happened, someone with power, someone who had never cared about children like hers until now, and that someone was about to show the world that sometimes the worst cruelty can awaken the deepest change. So keep listening, because what happens next will challenge everything you believe about wealth, pride, and the ability to make things right. The party was supposed to be magical, and in a way it was, but not because of the ball gowns or the chandeliers. Because that day, two little girls in handmade dresses lit a spark no one saw. The sky was turning orange and purple by the time Maria Bennett reached the stone walkway of the Edwards estate, her heart pounding like a war drum. She wasn't supposed to be back until 6. She hadn't planned on rushing out of her apartment, sewing needles still threaded, hands raw from days of tireless work, breath catching in her chest like a soul waiting to escape. But none of that mattered when she heard the voice on the phone, cool and careful, masking the storm of humiliation her daughters had just weathered. "They're very upset," the woman had said. "It might be best if you come pick them up now." Best? For who? Maria ran past the polished gates, past the manicured bushes, past the music still drifting from the ballroom windows like a cruel echo. She didn't feel the eyes of the guests watching from the grand patio, or the stiff nod of the security guard holding the door. All she could see were the two tiny figures huddled on a bench near the edge of the garden, her Lily and Lucy, no longer glowing with hope, but curled in on themselves like wilting flowers. "Mommy!" They saw her, and in that instant, everything broke. Their legs moved first, then their arms reached out, and then came the tears, loud, ragged, aching sobs that tore from their little chests and slammed into Maria like a tidal wave. She dropped to her knees, arms wide, catching them both as they flew into her embrace. One clung to her neck, the other to her waist, both trembling so violently she could barely keep them steady. "Oh, my babies," she whispered, stroking their hair, kissing their cheeks, wiping away tears faster than they could fall. "What happened? What did they do to you?" "They laughed at us," Lucy sobbed, her face buried in Maria's shoulder. "They said we didn't belong. They made fun of our dresses," Lily added through trembling lips. "Megan said we shouldn't be there. She said we were poor." Maria's breath caught, not because she hadn't expected something like this, not because the risk hadn't sat heavy in her stomach the moment she agreed to let them go, but because they were 5. And already the world had told them they were not worthy, not good enough, not welcome. She looked up at the security guard standing nearby. His face was tight with discomfort. "What happened?" she asked, her voice barely hiding her fury. "There was an incident," he said carefully. "They were asked to leave the party." "By children?" Maria snapped. "They were humiliated by children and no one stopped it?" The guard looked away ashamed. Maria stood, one arm around each daughter, and began walking them away from the house, away from the beautiful lights and distant laughter, away from the place that had promised magic and delivered cruelty instead. The dresses she had sewn with love were wrinkled now, stained with tears and chocolate footprints. The ribbons in their hair hung limp, and the storybook gift, her carefully chosen, hard-earned present, was tucked under Lily's arm, bent and dirty, one corner torn. They didn't speak on the bus ride home. The twins stared out the window, their reflections in the glass so small, so silent. Maria kept one hand on each of their knees, as if holding them physically could somehow hold their broken spirits too. Back home, the apartment felt colder. The familiar warmth of their modest kitchen, the comfort of Maria's sewing room, even the favorite stuffed animals perched on the twins' beds, all of it felt muted, distant, like nothing could be the same again. Maria made hot chocolate. She didn't know what else to do. She heated the milk, added the last bit of cocoa powder, stirred in the sugar, mechanically, carefully, pretending her hands weren't shaking. She set the mugs on the table and sat down across from her girls. "I know that was hard," she said gently, her voice softer than usual. "And I am so, so sorry." Lucy looked up, eyes puffy. "We thought it would be different." "I know, baby." "We just wanted to have fun," Lily added, her voice cracking. "Just once." Maria reached across the table and took their hands in hers. "You have every right to be there, to be anywhere. You're kind, you're smart, and you're brave. What they did to you, what those other kids said, that says everything about them and nothing about you." "But they all laughed," Lucy whispered. "Even some moms laughed." Maria's eyes welled with tears, not because her girls were wrong, but because they were right, because she'd seen it too many times, because she'd once believed, just maybe, that if she worked hard enough, if she sewed enough hems, patched enough seams, scrubbed her life spotless, then her daughters could rise above it all, could walk into any room and be seen for who they were, not where they came from. But this wasn't a scrape or a stumble. This was a wound, a deep, jagged one. And what do you tell a 5-year-old who's just learned the world can be so very cruel? Maria didn't know. All she could do was hold them. All she could do was rock them back and forth, whispering, "You are not what they said. You are not." Later that night, long after the girls had fallen asleep, curled together like twin moons under one blanket, Maria sat alone in her sewing corner. The room was dark, save for the small desk lamp glowing over her scattered spools and fabrics. The two dresses hung side by side on the back of the door, sagging slightly from the weight of the day. She stared at them. Every stitch had meant something. Every bead, every ruffle, every hem had been a message. You belong. You are beautiful. You are worthy. And they had been thrown to the wolves. Maria's hands clenched in her lap. For a moment, she imagined taking those dresses down and tearing them apart, piece by piece. But then she stopped. Because deep down, she knew, why so? It wasn't the dresses that failed her daughters. It was the world. It was a society that taught children to measure worth by brand names and bank accounts. It was a system that said money made you more, and kindness didn't matter. It was people, adults, who stood by while two little girls were torn down for daring to dream, and she had brought them there. She had sent them into that lion's den, praying it would be different, praying foolishly that this time hope wouldn't be punished. She dropped her head into her hands and cried for her daughters, cried for herself, cried for every parent who had to explain why the world wasn't fair to their child, cried because no matter how many dresses she sewed, no matter how many lunches she packed, she couldn't protect them from the poison of exclusion. But friends, if you're listening to this, if your heart is aching for Maria the way mine is, if you're picturing those two little girls in their homemade gowns, smiling bravely before the storm hit, then do something. Click that like button if you believe kindness should never be a luxury. Leave a comment for Maria, something to remind her that the world still holds good people, that the work she does, the love she gives matters more than money ever will. Say something for Lily and Lucy. Let them know that being different is not something to hide, that handmade dresses sewn with love carry more magic than any gown stitched in a Paris boutique. Let's lift up the voices that are too often ignored. Because this story, this heartbreak, it is not the end. It's a reckoning. And it's also the beginning of something bigger. Because someone else saw what happened that day. Someone powerful. Someone who, up until now, had never really looked beyond his gated mansion, his tech empire, his perfectly manicured life. That someone was Megan's father. And when he found out what his daughter had done, he did something no one expected. At exactly 5:14 p.m., the sleek black Bentley pulled into the circular driveway of the Edwards estate, its polished hood reflecting the golden hues of the late afternoon sun. Philip Edwards, tech mogul, billionaire, a man whose decisions moved markets and shaped futures, stepped out of the vehicle with his usual confidence. Dressed in a tailored gray suit, his shoes clicking against the stone pathway, he adjusted his watch without looking, already calculating how late he was. A high-stakes board meeting had run long, but he wasn't worried. His daughter's birthday party would still be in full swing. And what could possibly go wrong at a children's party? Inside the estate, everything looked perfect. Music drifted from the grand ballroom, laughter spilled through the halls, and guests, both children and adults, mingled with cocktails and confections in hand. Philip nodded to a few familiar faces as he walked past, barely registering their greetings. As he neared the entrance of the ballroom, something stopped him. It wasn't a noise, it wasn't a shout. It was the look on a staff member's face. Pierre, the head of security, glancing quickly away from the monitors as Philip passed. Philip paused, turned back. Pierre, the man froze. Yes, Mr. Edwards? Something wrong? No, sir. Everything's under control. Philip stepped inside the small security room. His eyes went straight to the monitors, live feeds from every camera in the estate. Let me see the last 30 minutes in the ballroom. Pierre hesitated. Sir, I don't think now. His voice was low, calm, but it didn't leave room for debate. Pierre swallowed hard, typed a few commands, and the screens began to replay. Philip watched. At first, it looked like any party. Children running, laughing, dancing. But then he saw his daughter, Megan, standing in the center of a growing crowd. Two small girls in handmade dresses approached, holding a gift with both hands. And then it began. The expressions, the laughter, the mocking, Megan's words. The way she snatched the present, tossed it aside. The way she stepped back as the circle of children closed in on the girls, now visibly shaking, their eyes wide with hurt. Philip's face hardened. He reached forward and turned up the audio, and then he heard it. They're poor. They shouldn't be here. They don't belong. The words, though spoken by children, landed like glass breaking in his ears. They echoed with the arrogance of wealth, the cruelty of unchecked privilege, and the silence, the worst of it, the adults in the background doing nothing. Philip stood motionless for a moment. Then slowly he said, Who are they? Pierre cleared his throat. Lily and Lucy Bennett, scholarship students. Their mother's name is Maria Bennett. And where are they now? They left, sir. Their mother picked them up a few minutes ago. They were very upset. Philip stared at the monitor a moment longer, then turned away. He moved fast, through the hall, down the corridor, back into the ballroom. The music was still playing. Children were dancing again. Parents sipped champagne, oblivious. And there in the center was Megan, his daughter, laughing again, as if nothing had happened. He stepped up to the stage where the band played and gave a single signal to the conductor. The music stopped. A hush fell. Philip took the microphone, his face unreadable, his voice smooth but steely. Good evening, everyone. I hope you've enjoyed the party, but before we go any further, there's something I need to address. Whispers spread through the crowd like sparks on dry leaves. About 30 minutes ago, Philip continued, two little girls, Lily Evadley and Lucy Bennett, were cruelly humiliated in this very room. These girls came here today in dresses their mother made by hand. They brought a gift they chose with care, and they were met with laughter, insults, rejection. Silence deepened. Philip scanned the room, his gaze sharp. I've seen the security footage. I heard what was said, and I am ashamed. Megan's smile faded. She stood frozen, staring up at her father as if he'd become a stranger. I am ashamed, Philip said again, because the ringleader of that cruelty was my daughter. Gasps rippled. Some adults began quietly gathering their things. Megan's lower lip trembled. Megan, Philip said gently but firmly, come here. She didn't move. Megan, now. She climbed the steps with the slow, hesitant steps of a child walking toward judgment. Philip knelt down, eye to eye with her. Do you understand what you did? I didn't mean to. You humiliated two girls because of what they wore, because they're not rich like you, because you thought that made them less. Megan's eyes filled with tears. And I take full responsibility, because I raised you, because I let you believe that money makes you better, because I never taught you that kindness matters more than privilege. Philip stood, his voice resonating. The party is over. Everyone, please leave. The crowd stirred in disbelief. I mean it. The party is finished. He turned to Megan. And you, young lady, are going to apologize. Not because I said so, but because it's the right thing to do. As guests shuffled awkwardly out, Philip stood firm, holding Megan's hand. His heart was heavy, not just with embarrassment, but with the awful clarity that he had failed. Not in business, not in success, but in the most important responsibility of his life, being a father. Later that night, after the house had emptied and the chandeliers dimmed, Philip sat in his private study. The security footage paused on the image of Lily and Lucy clutching each other as the laughter swelled around them. And something broke in him. These girls had done nothing wrong. They had come with hope, with open hearts. They had shown more courage in walking into that party than most adults ever did in their entire lives. He picked up his phone. "Find me their address," he said. "I need to see them. Tonight." Friends, if you're still listening, let me pause here and speak from the heart. What Philip did next will stay with you. But before we go there, I want you to take a moment. If you believe that kindness matters more than money, click the like button. If you think no child should ever be made to feel small because of where they come from, leave a comment for Philip. Tell him this moment mattered. Because this wasn't just a wake-up call for a wealthy man. This was a turning point for a father, for two little girls, for a mother who had nearly given up believing the world would ever truly see her children. This story, it's not about a party. It's about redemption. And what happened the next day? It changed everything. Sunday morning came draped in quiet. The city outside was still stretching its limbs, and the air was hushed with the kind of stillness that often follows a storm. Inside a modest third-floor apartment in a forgotten corner of town, Maria Bennett stood in her tiny kitchen, stirring a pot of oatmeal she wasn't sure her daughters would eat. The events of the day before had left an invisible weight in every corner of their home. The giggles, the chatter, the bright eyes that usually greeted each new day, those things had not returned with the rising sun. The twins were still in bed, curled up tightly under one blanket like two little dolls trying to hide from a world that had proven itself cold and unforgiving. They hadn't said much since they'd come home from the party, their fancy dresses wrinkled and stained, their heads bowed, their hearts quietly broken. Maria stared into the oatmeal, her spoon making small, slow circles. She was a mother who had always believed in hard work, in quiet dignity, in doing her best. And she had. She'd so had late into the night to give her daughters a chance, just one beautiful day to feel like the other kids. Instead, they'd been ridiculed, banished, and her belief in this system, in these people, in this school, had cracked. What hurt more than anything was knowing she couldn't undo it. She couldn't reach inside their memories and take the pain out. All she could do now was be there. Soft arms, warm food, a whispered, "I'm sorry," over and over. Then came the knock. It was soft, unexpected. At first, Maria thought it must be the neighbor upstairs, or maybe a delivery. She wiped her hands on a towel and opened the door, not expecting her heart to falter. There, standing against the dim hallway light, was Philip Edwards. Yes, that Philip Edwards. The billionaire. The tech magnate. The man whose name was printed on half the city's skyscrapers. Maria blinked, stunned. He didn't wear a suit today, no pressed tie, no expensive watch, just a charcoal sweater, dark jeans, and a look on his face that made her step back, not because she was scared, but because she had never seen a man who looked so powerful appear so humbled. "Mrs. Bennett?" he asked, voice low, uncertain. "Yes," she answered slowly, her tone guarded. "Can I help you?" I came to apologize," Philip said, gently holding up his hands. "May I come in?" Maria hesitated. She had so many questions, so many emotions. But behind him stood something she never expected: sincerity. So after a pause, she opened the door. The apartment was small but tidy. A sewing machine sat near the window, surrounded by neatly stacked fabrics. There were crayon drawings pinned to the refrigerator and shoes by the door far too small to belong to anyone but children. Philip took it all in, how the whole world of this little family had been built on scraps, careful effort, and love, and how easily people like him had once dismissed it all. "The girls are still asleep," Maria said quietly. "They didn't want to get out of bed." "I understand," Philip said, stepping into the living room. "That's why I came. I know it doesn't change what happened, but I had to see you, to see them, and to say how deeply, deeply sorry I am." Maria folded her arms across her chest. They came home crying, she said, not coldly but honestly. They think they don't belong anywhere. Philip sat down slowly on the edge of the couch, as if he didn't trust his own weight. I watched it all, he said, on the security cameras, every word, every laugh, and I saw how my daughter led it. There was pain in his voice. Not performative, not rehearsed, real. Maria said nothing. She didn't need to. My daughter humiliated yours, he continued, eyes fixed on the floor. And I let it happen, not just yesterday, but every day leading up to it. I created the environment, the attitude, the entitlement. I taught her, without meaning to, that she was better than others, that kindness was optional, that appearances mattered more than character. He looked up then, and Maria was startled to see his eyes glisten. I failed, he whispered, and I don't want your daughters to carry the weight of my failure. There was a long silence. Then from the hallway came the soft shuffle of feet. Two small figures appeared, sleepy-eyed, hair tousled. Lily and Lucy stood side by side in their pajamas, holding on to each other's hands. Maria turned. Sweethearts, this is Mr. Edwards, Megan's father. He came to speak with us. The girls stood frozen, unsure. Philip slowly stood, lowering himself to their level, kneeling until he looked them both in the eyes. Hi, Lily. Hi, Lucy, he said gently. I'm so sorry for what happened to you. I watched it happen, and it broke my heart. They said nothing, but their wide eyes studied him carefully. I know Megan hurt you, and I know a lot of other people laughed, and no one stopped it. That wasn't fair, and it wasn't your fault. Lucy's lip trembled. She said we didn't belong. You do belong, Philip said, his voice strong now. You belong in that school. You belong at any party. You belong wherever your hearts take you. And it's my job now to make sure you never feel otherwise again. He stood, pulled a folder from his bag, and handed it to Maria. I want to set up a full scholarship fund, he said, for both girls, through high school, through college, everything, tuition, books, uniforms, extracurriculars. I've already spoken to the school principal. They've agreed to implement a new inclusion program. Megan will apologize to both of your daughters publicly in class. Maria stared at the folder, stunned. Why? Because it's the right thing to do, Philip said. Because you've done more with thread and a sewing machine than I've done with millions. Because your daughters are brilliant. And because yesterday I saw the kind of people this world needs more of. And it wasn't the ones laughing in silk gowns. Lily stepped forward. But we're still poor. Philip smiled gently. You're rich in ways money can't touch. And now I want to use my money to help give you what you deserve, not as a handout, but as justice, as repair. Lucy clutched her mother's side. You promise Megan won't be mean again? Philip's smile faded into something more serious. She's learning. I took her to visit a children's shelter this morning. She played with kids who have nothing. She cried when we left. She's never had to think about other people's lives before. That's my fault. But I'm fixing it. The room fell silent again, thick with emotion. Then Maria finally spoke, her voice softer now. You're really trying. I am, Philip said. I can't undo yesterday, but I can change what comes next. Friends, if you've made it this far, take a moment. Think about what you would do if someone hurt your child. Think about what you would do if your child was the one doing the hurting. Philip could have hidden. He could have sent flowers or made a donation and called it even. But he didn't. He came. He knelt. He looked two little girls in the eyes and took responsibility. If you believe in second chances, if you believe that real change is possible, even for people who have made terrible mistakes, leave a comment below. Say something encouraging to Philip, to Maria, to Lily and Lucy. Let them know that what happened mattered, and that what they're building now matters even more. Because what began with a cruel party has now become something bigger. A spark of change, a step toward healing, a path toward justice, not just for these two girls, but for every child who's ever been made to feel small. And my friends, we're not done yet, because redemption is only the beginning. Monday morning dawned with a heavy gray sky, as though even the sun hesitated to shine after what had taken place just 2 days earlier. At Willowdale Academy, the prestigious school where every student wore perfectly pressed uniforms and came from families who vacationed in the Alps, The events of the weekend had become a quiet storm. Some pretended it hadn't happened. Others whispered in corners, glancing nervously at the empty desks near the window, Lily and Lucy Bennett's desks. But one person felt the weight of it more than anyone else. Megan Edwards sat alone in her bedroom, legs folded beneath her on a pastel comforter that used to be her favorite. Her tiara sat untouched on the shelf, the pink gown from her birthday party still hanging limply in the closet like a ghost of a girl she didn't recognize anymore. She was only 5, but what she had witnessed, and more importantly, what she had done, made her feel older than her years. She used to think being popular meant being powerful, that throwing a grand party made her special, that she could decide who was in and who wasn't. But that was before the footage played in front of her father's eyes, before the party ended with cold silence instead of cake, before he looked at her, not with anger, but with disappointment so deep it made her stomach twist into knots. "Put on your shoes," her father had told her the day before. "We're going somewhere." They'd driven without speaking, the hum of the car louder than any words could be. She thought maybe they were going to another store, or maybe a meeting where he would handle things for her. But they didn't go to a store, or a mansion, or a restaurant. They pulled up in front of a small, weathered brick building that sat between a laundromat and a boarded-up hardware store. A faded sign read, "Bright Horizons Children's Center." "What is this place?" Megan asked, clutching her designer coat. "It's where some children go when they don't have anywhere else to live," her father replied quietly. "I've donated money here for years, but I've never actually visited. Today I want you to meet the kids." Megan looked unsure. Do they know I'm coming?" "Yes, and they're excited." That was all he said before gently taking her hand and leading her inside. And what Megan saw in the next hour, what she felt, would change her in ways no lecture ever could. The children didn't have shiny shoes or fancy backpacks. Some of them wore clothes that didn't fit. One little girl had holes in her socks, but they were laughing, playing, sharing the same 4 puzzles and the same small box of crayons. They asked Megan to play with them as if she wasn't a stranger, as if they didn't care about her coat or her hair or the fact that she was richer than all of them put together. One boy showed her his drawing of a rocket ship made from triangles and stars. A girl handed her a sticker from a sheet she'd been saving. And when Megan told them she had a birthday party 2 days ago, not one of them asked why they weren't invited. They simply smiled and said, "Happy birthday." It was the first time in her life Megan realized kindness didn't have a price tag. Back at home that night, she told her father, "I want to say sorry, really say it, not because you said so, but because I want to." Now back at school, Megan stood in front of the class, her hands shaking just a little. The principal had called everyone to attention. The room fell silent. "I need to say something," Megan began, her voice soft but growing. "On Saturday, at my birthday party, I did something really wrong. I was mean to Lily and Lucy. I made fun of their dresses. I let other kids laugh at them. I hurt them. And I'm sorry, I didn't understand before, but I do now." The teacher didn't speak. The room was still. Some students looked confused. Others looked surprised. Megan continued, her voice steadier. "They were kind. They brought me a present, and I threw it on the ground. That wasn't okay. I don't want to be that kind of person anymore." She looked at the 2 desks by the window, empty today, and then at her teacher. "Can I sit with them tomorrow if they come back?" That afternoon, when Lily and Lucy returned to school, their mother's hands had trembled as she helped them dress. She didn't know what waited for them, but the girls were braver now, not because the world had gotten kinder, but because someone had finally stood up. When they entered the classroom, the room grew quiet, but instead of sneers or whispers, Megan stood up and walked to them. "Hi," she said softly. "I meant what I said. I really am sorry." Lily looked at her, eyes wide. Lucy glanced at their teacher. "You can sit next to me if you want," Megan added. It was a moment no one had expected. A shift, a small miracle. And the twins, still cautious, nodded slowly. "Okay," Lily whispered. But the journey wasn't over. At recess, Megan approached the bench where Lily and Lucy sat alone, drawing in the corners of their notebooks. She stood in front of them and asked, "Can I join you?" Before they could answer, a sharp voice cut through the air. "You're really going to sit with them?" It was Abby, Megan's former best friend, her tiara still gleaming even on the playground. A few other girls stood beside her, arms folded. Megan turned to face them. Yes, she said firmly. You're choosing them over your real friends? Abby sneered. Megan looked back at the twins. Lily's hand gripped her pencil tighter. Lucy shifted in her seat. They were used to this, used to the moment someone backed away. But Megan didn't. If you were really my friends, she said, her voice trembling but determined, you wouldn't make me choose. The silence that followed was louder than any scream. Abby's mouth fell open, then quickly closed. Whatever, she muttered, turning on her heel. The other girls followed. Megan turned back unsure. It's okay if you don't want to be my friends, she said to Lily and Lucy, but I still want to be yours. Lily scooted over on the bench. Sit down. And Megan did. They talked about books, about the shelter, about how hard math was, but how fun recess could be. Megan laughed at Lucy's joke about the school spaghetti. Lily showed her how to fold a paper butterfly, and somewhere between the fluttering wings of that little paper creation and the warmth of new conversation, a friendship began. It wasn't perfect. There were days Megan missed her old crowd. Times when other students whispered as she walked by with Lily and Lucy. But every time doubt crept in, Megan remembered the way those kids at the shelter had smiled, how they'd welcomed her without needing anything in return. She remembered how it felt to be kind, and how good it felt to be free of pretending. At home, Philip noticed the difference. His daughter no longer obsessed over her closet. She donated her tiaras to a dress-up corner at the shelter. She helped set the table without being asked. She read books with Lily and Lucy when they came over, and told her dad, being nice makes you feel bigger inside. It wasn't just a change, it was a transformation. Dear listener, if you're still with me, thank you. This part of the story doesn't have fireworks, no red carpets, no dramatic music, but it's the part that matters most, because real change doesn't always happen in big moments. Sometimes it happens on a playground bench. Sometimes it happens when a child learns to say, I'm sorry, and means it. So please, if you believe in second chances, if you've ever seen someone become better and felt proud of them, leave a comment for Megan. She's just a little girl, but she chose right when it wasn't easy. And in doing so, she made space for Lily and Lucy to bloom. That's what real friendship is, and it's a lesson that can change not just one school, but the world. It started with a question that wouldn't leave Philip Edwards alone. How many more Lily and Lucys are there who shared? That single question echoed in his mind days after the party had ended and the guests had all gone home. The lights from the chandeliers were long dim, the crumbs of untouched cake swept into bags, and the glitter from party hats still glinted faintly in the corners of the ballroom. But none of it mattered anymore. What remained, long after the noise and decorations had faded, was the image of two tiny girls in handmade dresses, eyes red with tears, shoulders hunched not from misbehavior, but from shame they never deserved. That memory clung to Philip like smoke, and he couldn't let it go. At first, he thought maybe helping Lily and Lucy was enough. The apology, the scholarship fund, the public recognition. He had done something rare, acknowledged a mistake, made it right, at least for them. But the more he listened, the more he paid attention, the more he realized the cruelty at the party had only been a symptom, not the cause. Because it wasn't just Megan's mistake. It was a culture, a system, one that had been broken long before those little girls ever stepped into that glittering ballroom. One morning, while sipping coffee in his home office, Philip opened a manila folder he'd requested from the head of school operations, a file containing 10 years of data from Willowdale Academy. On the surface, everything looked polished. Test scores, student clubs, extracurricular participation, college admissions, but then he looked deeper. Cross-referenced names, compared records, and his heart sank. And in 5 years, not a single scholarship student had been selected for the national debate team. None had ever represented the school in science fairs or state spelling bees, even though many outperformed their peers in academics. None had ever been invited on exclusive cultural exchange programs or parent-sponsored international trips. And it didn't end there. Philip saw names of students, bright, eager, resilient, who had achieved top scores in written assessments, but whose oral presentation scores always lagged behind. When he followed the trail further, he discovered a pattern. Teachers praised them in private but gave lower grades in public-facing projects. Parents of wealthier students often volunteered for events. Scholarship parents weren't even asked. It wasn't overt. No one had ever said, "You don't belong." But the silence said it. The exclusion said it. The way children like Lily and Lucy sat at lunch tables with empty seats beside them, while the rest of the school buzzed with invitations and cliques said it every day. Philip leaned back in his chair, stunned by the quiet efficiency of it all. The system hadn't needed to say it was biased. It simply was. And for years he had funded it. He had donated, sponsored, hosted auctions. He had sat beside other board members sipping wine and smiling at award ceremonies, never once noticing that the same last names appeared on every plaque. Never once asking why the scholarship children, the ones whose names were tucked at the bottom of class lists, rarely received a single trophy. He rubbed his face with both hands and exhaled. He thought of Maria, strong, proud Maria, who had worked night after night on those princess dresses, only for her daughters to be laughed out of a room they had every right to be in. He remembered the courage in her eyes when he first knocked on her door. Not anger, not spite, just exhaustion. And something else, something worse, acceptance, as though she had already known the world wasn't built for families like hers. No more, he thought. The next morning, Philip walked into the administrative building of Willowdale Academy. The receptionist blinked in surprise. He usually scheduled meetings weeks in advance. But today, he asked to see the principal and the school board chair. Immediately. When they gathered in the boardroom, Philip didn't waste time. "I'm funding a complete audit of school policies," he said, voice calm but resolute. "I want transparency on every selection process, from clubs to competitions to awards." The board chair, an older man with graying hair and a polished tie, cleared his throat. "Mr. Edwards, I assure you we have always operated with integrity." "No," Philip interrupted, firmly but without malice. "You've operated with comfort, with tradition, not integrity." He slid the folder across the table. "Tell me why not a single scholarship student has received a community leadership award. Why they aren't on your field trip rosters. Why the top math student isn't even invited to peer tutoring groups. Tell me why your own teacher's notes describe Lucy Bennett as a remarkable reader and natural leader, and yet she's never once been asked to present an assembly." Silence. The principal looked down. The chair shifted in his seat. "I'm not here to point fingers," Philip continued. "I'm here to fix it, starting today." He outlined the plan. A new Edwards Inclusion Fund, specifically earmarked to ensure equity and opportunities, not just tuition, but travel, supplies, mentorship, and visibility. Every teacher would undergo training on unconscious bias. Anonymous evaluation panels would be created for club admissions. Every event would include parental outreach across the board. Every voice, wealthy or not, would have a seat at the table. And, Philip added, "we will double the number of scholarships next year, because clearly, we've been failing too many families for far too long." The board reluctantly agreed, unable to deny the truth. But Philip wasn't done. He sent letters to every parent in the school. Not formal PR-crafted statements, but a heartfelt note, written in his own hand. "If we want our children to grow up kind, we need to show them what fairness looks like. My daughter learned a hard lesson recently. So did I. Let's make sure no child ever has to feel small to teach us how to be better." Then he called Maria. "I'd like your input," he told her over the phone. "My input?" she asked, cautious. "Yes, I want to hear from someone the system ignored." There was a pause, then softly, "All right." When Maria arrived on campus the following week to speak at the first Voices of Inclusion roundtable, she wore a simple dress she had sewn herself. Clean lines, confident posture, no apologies. Lily and Lucy held her hands, walking past parents who had once whispered behind their backs. But now something had shifted. People looked, some even smiled, and this time they weren't smiling with mockery, they were smiling with respect. Maria stood before a crowd of educators and administrators and told her story. She spoke of raising twin girls on her own, of stretching every dollar, of sewing until her hands cramped. She spoke of believing in education, of hoping every day that someone would see her daughters, not as the poor twins, but as children who deserved to be there. By the time she finished, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. And then she said something Philip would never forget. I used to think I had to work harder just to catch up. Now I understand. It's not about working harder. It's about removing the obstacles that were never meant to be there. Dear listener, if you've come this far, I want to thank you because you've been on this journey with Lily, Lucy, Maria, and now Philip. And I want you to know something important. This story isn't just about a party. It's not even just about two little girls in handmade dresses. It's about the world we build for our children and for ourselves. It's about systems we think are just the way things are until someone finally asks why. So I invite you right now to leave a comment for Maria, for Lily and Lucy. For the many other children sitting quietly at the back of classrooms, dreaming in silence, waiting for someone to open a door that's always been shut, tell them you see them. Tell them they matter. And if you believe, truly believe, that kindness and fairness can rewrite the stories we thought were set in stone, then share this story. Because when people like Philip finally wake up, when people like Maria finally get the microphone, when little girls like Lily and Lucy are finally seen, that's when everything changes. It had been 6 months since the party, the day two little girls had walked into a ballroom filled with glitter and left with broken hearts and wrinkled dresses. And yet, in some strange and wonderful way, it now felt like a lifetime ago. In the small but lively apartment, where once only worry and quiet determination lived, laughter now echoed through the halls like music. The sunlight that poured through the windows no longer revealed threadbare corners and worn-down dreams. Now it lit up bolts of imported fabric, color swatches pinned to boards, and sketches of children's outfits drawn with meticulous detail. Maria Bennett, once the invisible seamstress who had walked her daughters to school with her head down, now stood at the heart of a humming atelier, her hands busy, her eyes bright, and her voice full of purpose. The new sewing machine, sleek, silent, faster than anything she had ever worked with, sat beside her grandmother's old, rattling relic. And sometimes, when the girls were asleep and the world was quiet again, she still used the old machine just to remember where it all began. That machine had sewn the princess dresses that her daughters wore with pride and pain. It had stitched together more than fabric. It had held together a mother's dreams. What began as an apology from a billionaire had become a catalyst. Philip Edwards hadn't just funded Maria's daughter's education. He hadn't just spoken words of remorse in a ballroom of shocked parents. He had stayed. He had followed through. And not just with money, but with time, intention, and a sincerity that Maria had never expected from someone who lived in glass towers and signed seven-figure contracts. It started with simple gestures: a call asking how the girls were doing, an email introducing Maria to a boutique children's fashion buyer, a quiet offer to lease her a larger space for her growing business, on her terms, with no strings attached. He never called it charity, he called it restoration. "I'm not giving you anything," he said once, over coffee in the corner of her studio. "I'm just returning what should have never been taken." Maria had stared at him, eyes full of unspoken thoughts. He was right. Years ago, she had been unfairly dismissed from a job in his household, fired over a lie, blamed for something she didn't do, left without references while carrying her unborn twins. That firing had derailed everything. And when he discovered that truth buried in old HR files, Philip had sat in silence for a long time, looking like a man crushed under the weight of what he'd missed. "You were working for my family," he had whispered. "And I never knew." But he made it right, not with excuses, but with action. Maria's business, once a solitary corner of her kitchen table, was now a recognized name among boutique children's brands. Her clothes, soft cotton jumpers, detailed party dresses, tiny embroidered jackets, were worn by kids who smiled honestly, who didn't care about designer labels as long as they felt special. Orders poured in, clients raved, and most importantly, Maria had hired 3 women from her own community. Single mothers like her, women who had never been given a chance. Now they sewed side by side, sharing stories, sipping tea, and building something that was so much more than a business. And her daughters? Oh, her daughters. Lily and Lucy thrived in ways Maria had only dared to dream. They walked into Willowdale Academy now with heads held high. Their uniforms were no longer mismatched hand-me-downs, but neatly pressed and tailored to fit. Their lunches were full, their school supplies bright and new, but none of that compared to what had changed inside them. Confidence, joy, belonging. Lily joined the science club. She loved insects and built a solar-powered bug trap for the school fair. Lucy surprised everyone, including herself, by winning first place in the school's poetry contest, her soft voice shaking as she read a poem called The Girl Who Came in Handmade Shoes. When she finished, the auditorium rose in applause. Even some of the parents who had once turned away from them were wiping tears from their eyes. And then there was Megan, the girl who had started it all. She had become something else entirely. After months of therapy, volunteering, and honest conversations, Megan was no longer the child who stood on a throne and mocked others. She was quieter now, kinder, thoughtful in ways that only a child who had seen her reflection clearly could be. She and the twins became friends, not best friends, not instantly, but real ones. Ones who walked to class together, sat beside each other during lunch, and exchanged birthday cards with doodles and stickers instead of store-bought perfection. Philip watched his daughter grow and transform, and with each step, he too changed. He no longer stayed at the office until midnight. He no longer missed dinners or school plays. He no longer saw success in numbers alone. Sometimes he looked at Megan and thought, she's becoming the person I hoped I'd be. Had someone taught me early on what really matters? And every time he stepped into Maria's atelier, whether it was to deliver fabric, see new designs, or simply sit and talk, he felt something shift inside him again. Respect, admiration, maybe something even deeper. Their conversations grew longer. Less about business, more about books, dreams, fears, about parenting, about justice. One evening, they sat together on a bench outside the atelier, the air filled with the scent of lavender from the potted plants Maria had finally been able to afford. "Do you ever wonder," Maria asked softly, "what would have happened if I hadn't said yes to the party?" Philip looked at her, the faint lines around his eyes illuminated by the setting sun. "I think about it all the time," she smiled sadly. "We'd still be in the shadows. They'd still think silence was harmless. And I'd still think I was a good father," he said quietly, "without ever knowing the truth." Maria looked away, her eyes misty. "It's strange how one act of cruelty led to all this." "It wasn't just cruelty," Philip said. "It was a mirror. And once you see yourself in one, you either turn away or you change." She nodded. Then after a pause, she whispered, "I'm glad you chose to change." He looked at her then, long and honest. "I think you changed me." Listener, if you're still here, if your heart has been walking alongside Maria, Lily, and Lucy this entire time, take a moment. Think about the power of a second chance. Think about the quiet resilience of a mother who sewed until her fingers ached, not for profit, but for dignity. Think about the little girls who walked into a party wearing dreams stitched into their skirts and walked out thinking they'd never belong. And then think about how, with one person choosing kindness, everything changed. Please, if you believe in redemption, in justice, in the unseen strength of everyday people, leave a comment for Maria, for Lily and Lucy, for all the parents like her who keep showing up, doing their best, loving with their whole hearts even when the world doesn't clap for them. Tell them you see them. Tell them their story mattered. And if you believe that kindness doesn't end with a gesture, but grows into something far deeper, something like love, like respect, like new beginnings, then share this, because the story isn't ending. 6 months had passed since the fateful party that shattered two little girls' hearts and woke a sleeping conscience in a man who once believed money could solve anything. Now the seasons had changed, and with them, so had the lives of everyone touched by that one moment of cruelty that spiraled into an unexpected journey of growth, redemption, and grace. The final chapter of this story didn't close in a courtroom or a boardroom, but in the soft rustling of pages being turned, the echo of children's laughter in a schoolyard, and the tender sound of a sewing machine still whirring through fabric and hope in a little sunlit atelier where dreams were now stitched daily into every thread. It was a crisp spring morning when Willowdale Academy hosted its annual Day of Gratitude. Students stood with their families under a canopy of flowering cherry blossoms, and teachers passed out small slips of paper where each child could write a message to someone they were thankful for. The air was full of joy and forgiveness, with sunlight dancing between the branches, warming the bricks of a school that had been quietly transformed by its own reckoning. And in the center of it all, smiling, confident, proud, stood Lily and Lucy Bennett. She must be Bennett, dressed in modest but beautifully tailored uniforms, made by the very hands that had once sewn their princess gowns. Their hair was braided neatly with pale ribbons, and their eyes sparkled. Not with the forced bravery of children trying to prove they belonged, but with the natural light of girls who knew, beyond any doubt, that they did. They had been chosen to speak at the ceremony. Lily clutched her note card nervously while Lucy gave her hand a reassuring squeeze. They stepped onto the platform, standing on tiptoes to reach the microphone. The crowd fell silent. "My sister and I want to say thank you," Lily began, her voice soft but clear. "Not just for letting us stay at this school, but for seeing us." Lucy continued, "We didn't always feel seen. We were quiet. We didn't have fancy shoes or big lunches, but now we have friends. We have confidence, and we have dreams." And the applause that followed wasn't just polite, it was genuine, warm, and full of admiration. And among the sea of smiling faces, Megan Edwards stood with her hand raised in a soft wave, her eyes glistening. She had come a long way too, from a throne of mockery to the grounded reality of empathy. She was no longer the untouchable princess at the center of a circle, but a part of something real, something human. And just behind the twins, standing with his hands folded and eyes fixed on them with fatherly pride, was Philip Edwards, no longer just the billionaire tech mogul, but a man forever changed by the lessons his daughter had taught him, and by the courage of a woman he once failed to notice. Maria Bennett stood beside him, no longer the struggling seamstress ignored in PTA meetings and avoided by school moms. No, she was now the founder and creative director of a beloved children's fashion line, featured in local magazines, praised not just for her designs, but for her heart. The atelier she'd once dreamed of now had a wait list of clients. But more importantly, it was a place of opportunity where she employed women like her, those with talent but no platform, those with stories tucked between their stitches. And perhaps the most beautiful part of this entire story was that none of this was born from perfection. It had all started with failure, with a mistake, with a child's cruelty and a father's blindness. But it didn't stay there because someone had the courage to say, "This is not okay," because someone else had the humility to listen, and because hearts that had been hardened by wealth, by struggle, by rejection, had softened just enough to let something new grow. Dear listener, this story is more than just something to pass the time. It's a mirror. And I hope by the time you reach this final part, you saw a little bit of yourself somewhere in it. Maybe you've been like Lily or Lucy, trying to fit in, to be seen, to feel that your quiet presence matters. Maybe you've had moments where you were overlooked, laughed at, or made to feel like you were on the outside looking in. Or maybe, like Megan, you've realized that popularity can be empty when it's built on excluding others. Maybe you've hurt someone, even without meaning to, and you're wondering if it's too late to change. And maybe, just maybe, you've been like Philip, successful, admired, even respected, but not truly awake to the pain happening just outside your comfort zone. Until life threw you a moment you couldn't ignore, a moment that asked you to stop everything and see. And if you're like Maria, oh dear heart, if you are Maria carrying the weight of the world on tired shoulders, stitching together dreams late into the night, praying your children get what you never had, then let me say this to you. You are the quiet hero of someone's story, and your love, your effort, your faith in a future that hasn't yet arrived, it matters more than you know. This story ends not with a bow, but with a blooming. Because the truth is, life doesn't hand us perfect endings. It gives us chances. It gives us people. It gives us moments that seem like tragedies, but end up becoming the turning points we never saw coming. So here is the advice I hope you carry with you from this story. Be kind, especially to those who seem invisible. Look closer. Not everything that sparkles is real, and not everything handmade is small. Speak up. When you see injustice, don't stay silent. Your voice might be the one that starts the change. Forgive. People can grow, children can learn, and hearts can soften. And most of all, believe. Believe that one small act of compassion can ripple into 100 miracles. Friends, if this story touched your heart, if you saw something of your own journey in the stitches of Maria's resilience or the bravery of two little girls who dared to dream, please take a moment. Click the like button to show your support for Lily, Lucy, and every child out there still waiting to be seen. Leave a comment for Maria. Let her know that the world needs more mothers like her. Send a kind word to Megan, because children who grow after getting it wrong need encouragement too. And if you want to hear more stories like this, real stories with heart, with struggle, with redemption, subscribe to this channel. Because every week we share stories not just to entertain you, but to remind you of the goodness still alive in this world. Stories that make you feel, stories that make you hope, stories that say you are not alone. So thank you for listening, for staying until the very end. And remember, sometimes the most beautiful beginnings are hidden inside the most painful endings. See you in the next story, dear friend.